Hello learners, welcome back to the course MS012 Ecosystem and Natural Resource. In this session, we are going to look into a broad topic on resource and the concept of renewability, looking into the importance of, understanding the resources, right? Louis talked about renewability. Let us have a quick look into what exactly the resources are and what is the concept of renewability. We know that, life on this planet Earth, it depends upon large number of goods and services provided by the Mother Nature. And that's goods and services provided by the Mother Nature is known as natural resources. In a broad sense, they differ to all the living and non-living gift of the Earth. Traditionally, if you look into their usage, it confines the term to naturally occurring resources and systems that are useful to human under ordinary technological, economic, social, and legal circumstances. So, the air we breathe, the water elixir of life, the soil we plant the crops, the minerals in the form of foil and non-foil we use, the forests we have seen, crops cultivated, and wildlife around us are all examples of natural resources. This not only includes the product but also the services provided by them, including the waste assimilative capacities of all parts of the environment, right? So many of the natural resources are essential for our survival, as we know that while some others are used for satisfying our wants or needs. So a natural resources can be a substance, an energy unit, or a natural process or phenomenon. For example, land, soil is, water, grassland, forest, energy sources, and so on. Some of the resources like soil, water are important components of life supporting system. The natural sources are not only sources of food, fodder, and shelter. We also know that they also provide recreational opportunities, solace, and even inspiration to humankind. So the nature of resources, it varies, from society to society. The variation is directly or indirectly related to the culture, level of development in that area, the nature of the work of that society. So natural resources, we know from the beginning, have been exploited by human beings. However, since the resources were abundant than the demand, in that time, no significant depletion occurred. But due to considerable increase in consumption during the last few decades, especially after post-industrialization, in the same time, due to increase in human population, serious destruction has been caused to these natural resources. So, keeping all these resources or all these issues in our mind, the main objective from the lens of sustainability of these resources is to conserve them and to utilize all those resources in a sustainable manner, right? So, in this session, let us try to understand the concept of renewability and non-renewability of the resources and how it has to be harvested. We know that if you look into value of natural resources, as we talk, that there are 5 basic values that we call as 5 E's of natural resources. They are ethical, emotional, aesthetic or aesthetic, economic, and environmental services. When we talk about the value of natural resources from the concept of ethical value, it's about the value of resources onto itself, regardless of its value to humans. This is the intrinsic value or ethical values, and it gives right to the existence to, for example, the mountain we see as a mountain, the forest, stream, plants, or a worm. So in fact, if you look into these 5 categories, only critical. This first one is an intrinsic value, and the other rest 4 are considered as extrinsic value. That means emotional, static, economic, environmental services, right? So these intrinsic values are ecocentric in nature, means environment oriented. In other way, when we talk about extrinsic values, they are values that are external to a resource's own right to exist. So this extrinsic value on the one side is refers to the resource's ability to provide something for humans. So such values is taken as we talk that as that have orientation that approach of anthropocentric, means human oriented, more utilitarian or practical than intrinsic values, and therefore political and economic debates on resource management discuss them more widely than those extrinsic values. When we talk about emotional values of natural resources, it includes the value of a resource beyond sensory enjoyment. For example, emotional bonds of some people for certain natural settings, plants or animals. This is sometimes called as a sense of place. Many psychologists consider, the nature to be important for mental health, especially for children. That's why today's generation, those children who are in urban area, especially in the word of Professor Swaminathan says that they have nature deficit syndrome. And again, when we talk about this value of natural resources from point of static or aesthetic value, this aesthetic value is the role of a resource in making the world more beautiful, more appealing and pleasant to the senses. The value of one places on a cool breeze, fresh air on a summer morning, the peace and calmness in initial setting. These are some of the examples where you can look the value of natural resources from the point of aesthetic value. So this may bear no value for some, whereas indispensable for some others. Like in summer season, especially those in northern Indian cities, we prefer to go to the hilly state, right? Then coming to the economic value, this is very important part. Now, when you look natural resources value from economic values, these are associated with tangible products such as the food, timber, energy, and so on. We know unlimited and indefinite numbers of economic value we have seen directly, indirectly. So these values are influenced by market forces and can be absorbed as well as long term in nature. So society needs to focus more on long term economic values when we look into the natural resources from the point of economic values, which actually provide more income over the long run. So this value of resources like tourism, native fruits, and other such products is they are ultimately much greater than the value of their destructive use. So this has to be pointed. We have to point to be noted, right? Then the last few decades, we sometimes do not count this value of natural resources, that is environmental services values, right? See, these environmental services values are the value of resources in providing intangible services that allow humans and other life to exist on earth. As we know that plants help purify air and produce oxygen. Plant roots and soil microbes purify water, and ultimately all food relies on a variety of environmental services like logging, mining, and the type of harvesting that destroy resources that called direct values. If we look from the direct values of natural resources, right? Most of environmental problem, these are areas that happen, that is the consequences of then when resources are appreciated only for their direct values, which are generally short term in nature, and in turn artificially discount their true value to society and to future generation. Actual economic value, then other four values we discuss are and the indirect values. So, for reflecting true value of resources, environmental course needs to be taken into account. That's why in our course in postgraduate diploma in sustainability science, we are going to look into the ecological economics. Then coming to when we know the values of natural resources. Now, let us have a quick look into what exactly the concept of resource. And when the process of using the resources, we know waste is produced. So, what is the basic concept behind resource and waste? As we know that a resource is a means of satisfying human and social requirement in a given space and time. Technically, if we look into this term, is a naturally occurring solid, liquid or gaseous material in or on the earth crust in such form, concentration, amount that economic extraction of a useful commodity is currently or potentially feasible. So, this resource is classified into two broad categories: identified and undiscovered resources. So, a point to be noted that this feature of undiscovered resources and all these are more appropriate to use in the mineral kingdom as for biological resource, because there is no meaning about undiscovered resource for technical region. When we talk about identified resources, they are those resources whose location, grade, quality and quantity are known or estimated from specific geological evidence. They include economic, marginal economic and sub-economic component. So, a natural resource need not always have a direct economic link. The indirect service, like what we talk about environmental services, like fresh air, clean water, recreational pleasure, etc., what we get from this nature, they bear a lot of value, but they may not have an economic tag. But fortunately, during the last 1 decade or 2 decades, we are starting appreciating those values. So, these resources are in fact, they are vital for life to sustain. Then one evaluate the benefit that one get from having a good physical and mental health due to those natural resources. So, in turn, the formation of a healthy society depends upon a healthy person. So, when we talk about again waste, our daily activities, they give rise to a large variety of different waste that arise from different sources and have their effect on our health, on the environment or aesthetics values of resources or surrounding aesthetic values. The household rubbishes, sewage slush, waste from manufacturing activities, packaging items, discarded cars, all television, garden woods, all pen containers and so on are examples of waste. So, if you exactly look into the technical definition of waste according to Basel Convention, and then waste can be defined as a substance or substances or objects which are disposed of or are intended to be disposed of or are required to be disposed of by the provisions of national law. The waste may be generated during the extraction of raw materials, the processing of raw materials into intermediate and final products, the consumption of that final products and during other human activities. That is, waste in many cases are byproduct of a product or a process. That's we noted. So, in the same time, waste is a resource that is misplaced, mistimed or misproportionate. Or in other words, we can say that waste can become a resource if we properly place at a proper time in appropriate amount or proportion. For example, an agricultural residue is burned, becomes a waste, but if composted, become a resource. The extra amount of fertilizer that is applied to any field, then the requirement of the crop is a waste. Similarly, if you look into the external, most of the external that material applied to a crop field unsynchronized with the requirement of the plant goes waste. Use of drinking quality water for purpose, say gardening, etc., where low-grade water can be used in the wastage or the valuable resources. For example, if you look into water in a reservoir supply system, it is a resource, but when flows into drain become waste. Like that, a drug in proper proportion, adequate dose and administered to the patient in the right time is life-saving medicine, but otherwise it become a poison, right? So, on the basis of physical stat, the waste can be of 3 types. solid waste, liquid waste, and gaseous waste. So these different types of waste that get generated due to our everyday activity or from manufacturing units of different types of industry, that may be small scale, cottage, or big industry, they are driven by our demand and add up to a huge amount. So different example of waste you can see: municipal waste, then industrial waste, hazardous waste, construction and demo waste, mining waste, biodegradable municipal waste, air, agricultural, and so on. In details we will learn in another course of PGDSS. So this varied and voluminous waste have to arrive at a final resting place somewhere, right? So there is a steady flow of these varieties of waste, including your domestic garbage and yard waste of industrial, commercial, and construction refuse, and this is termed as waste flow. Many of the material in our waste stream or waste flow would be valuable resources if they were not mixed with other garbage. Here again, the recyclable waste or decomposable waste which have become resources by processing remain a waste and contributes to the volume of flow in the waste stream. That's why we're talking about proper waste management, right? Again, let us look into, we're talking about renewability, reuse, and all these things about the resources when we talk about the product of resources when after use and waste, right? And we are more concerned about, as sustainably concerned about the limitation of natural resources in its availability. So when you look into the concept, the type of resources and its concept, let us have a quick look into the basis of availability. Resources that can be looked into exhaustible and inexhaustible. Again, this can be divided again from the point of exploitation. Again, this inexhaustible can be looked into as a perpetual and renewable, right? Again, this exhaustible can be looked into potentially renewable and non-renewable, right? So here you will see that in this diagram you will see there that when you talk about inexhaustible, that can be of perpetual. When you talk about perpetual, solar energy, you have tidal energy, wind energy. When you talk about renewable, it is about wind, tides, flowing water, etc. So when we talk about perpetual resources, we know that solar energy is also called as perpetual resource. When you look into a human time scale and magnitude of the way we are used, it is essentially inexhaustible. It is expected to last at least 6.5 billion years while the sun completes its life cycle. Then when you talk about renewable resources, they have the capacity to reappear or replenish themselves by quick recycling and replacement within a reasonable time. Like soil, water, wind, tides, wave, flowing water, ocean thermal, geothermal energy, they are examples of renewable resources. And living beings, living beings like plants, animals, they are potentially renewable resources. When we talk about potentially renewable resources, that can be renewed fairly rapidly from hours to several decades through natural process. Examples are like microbes, forest trees, grassland, that grasses, wild animal, fresh lake, stream water, groundwater, fresh air, and fertile soil. So one of the important potentially renewable resource is, we know that biological diversity, sometimes called as biodiversity. When we talk about this in details in the previous sessions, that consists of life form and they can best survive in the variety of conditions currently found on Earth. This can be looked at in different levels like genetic diversity, species diversity, then ecological diversity. That is what we are seeing in front of us, like forests, grassland, wetlands, and so on. We know that this rich variety of genes, species, and biological community that give us food, wood, fibers, energy, raw material, industrial chemicals, and medicine, and so on. So our Earth's vast inventory of life forms, biological communities, they also provide us free recycling and purification services. Several types of environment degradation, they can change potentially renewable resources into non-renewable or unusable resources. That is the point. That is the reason we have to look we have to understand the issues of sustainability here. You will see topsoil is now eroding faster than it forms. That soil built up has reduced the yield of 1/4 of all irrigated croplands. Waterlogging has affected at least 1/10 of the such cropland. Coral reefs are being destroyed or damaged in 93 of the 109 major locations. So each year, because of overgrazing by livestock, that degrades a large area of land. Almost half of world's tropical forests have been cleared. If you look in developed countries, many of the remaining diverse old-growth forests are being replaced with single species tree farms or with much less diverse second-growth forests. So this is the exact situation which we need to be understand. So when we talk about non-renewable resources again, this is resources which are not regenerated because they do not have a life cycle or are not recycled, and that's why the term is non-renewable or exhaustible resources. These are resources that exist in a fixed quantity in Earth's crust and thus theoretically can be completely used up. On a time scale of million to billion of years, such resources can be renewed by geological process. However, on the much shorter human time scale of hundreds to thousands of years, these resources can be depleted much faster than they are formed. Like you see mineral deposits are formed slowly over millions of years. Once used, cannot be generated. That's why we're talking about limitation of fossil fuels like petrol and coal. So the formation, the formation of soils take thousands of years, and it's not renewable. It's not renewable in the lifespan of many generations. So it is thought that we can say this can be categorized as non-renewable resources. All these resources provide food, fodder, fuel, medicine, and clothes for men, and hence sustain life on this planet. So these exhaustible resources, they include different energy resources like coal, oil, natural gas, metallic minerals, non-metallic mineral resources, and so on. Right? We know that mineral resources that refers to any hard usually crystalline material that occurs naturally. We extract more than 100 non-renewable minerals from Earth's crust and convert raw materials into many items to be used, discarded, or recycled. At the same time, the availability of non-renewable resources, which we refer as their reserve, that's non-reserve deposit from which a usable mineral can be profitably extracted at current prices, that area is called reserve. This reserve can be increased when new deposits are found or when the price rises make it profitable to extract identified deposits that are previously considered too expensive to exploit. The reason why I am bringing this concept of mineral and the reserve is to link with our understanding in the renewability classes and the classes of resources and understanding the concept of renewability. So in practice, we never completely exhaust the non-renewable mineral resources. However, mineral resources become economically depleted when the cost of finding, extracting, transporting, and processing the remaining material exceeds the amount incurred from them. So at that point, we are left with choices like recycling or reusing the existing supply, wasting less, use less, trying to develop a substitute, or finally doing without them and wait millions of years for more to be produced. So when you talk about recycling, it involves collecting and reprocessing a resource into new products. For example, glass bottles can be crushed and melted to make a new bottles or other glass items, right? When you talk about reuse, it involves using a resource over and over in the same form. For example, glass bottle can be collected, washed, and refilled many times. Similarly, when you talk about copper, aluminum, etc., they can be recycled or reused to extend the supplies. So, non-renewable energy sources such as coal, oil, and natural gas cannot be cycled or reused. Once it is burned, the useful energy in the fossil fuels is gone, then leaving behind waste heat and polluting exhaust gases. So the growth and the production of living beings can be successfully managed so that these resources continue to regenerate. So on overexploitation, not only their quality becomes affected, they may even totally exhaust. So they are maintainable. The highest rate at which potentially renewable resources can be used indefinitely without reducing its available supply, that is called sustainable yield or supporting capacity. So this is a certain term we need to understand when we talk about renewability and the concept of renewability and that classification of natural resources. So if a resource's natural replacement rate is exceeded, the available supply begins to shrink. This process is In that process, it created environmental degradation. This process is called environmental degradation. So some resources do not have a life cycle but can be recycled. For example, water. But purely exhaustible resources like fossil fuel and some minerals are non-maintainable, right? Then again, when we look into renewable resources from the point of supporting capacity and assimilative capacities. So we know that for any biological resources, they remain renewable, and it is very much essential to harvest its produce within the supporting capacity of the ecosystem. When we talk about supporting capacity of a natural ecosystem, it is the maximum number of consumers or the quantity of harvest it can support, ensuring a continuous supply of this resource or resources to fetch the optimum requirement or consumption. In other words, the rate of consumption or harvest remains below the rate of regeneration. If the resource consumption or harvest exceeds the supporting capacity of resource base, the stock will start declining, resulting into lower yield. So if the practice of overexploitation still prevails, then the cycle of less stock and lesser yield will continue and the system will collapse. For example, in case of aquaculture, say fisheries, if sufficient number of organisms are not left in the system after the first year of harvest and sufficient time is not given to regenerate, the accessible stock by the next harvest will have a reduced yield. The decreasing trend will follow upward, but the rate of decreasing harvest will go on increasing, and at a certain point of time, either that ecosystem will collapse or the cost of harvest will become prohibitive. Some example, harvest of timber from the forest, non-timber forest produce grazing in the grassland. So when we talk about assimilative capacity, then again, we know that there are overexploitation. As the supporting capacity of the ecosystem or the community decreases, its capacity to bear environmental stress or pollution also goes on decreasing. So this capacity of neutralizing environmental stress or pollution of an ecosystem or a community is called assimilative capacities. So an optimum size of population or community structure is required to maintain their microclimate and other biological activities. Similarly, at ecosystem level, the assimilative capacity depends upon the ecosystem health. When this assimilative capacity decreases below its resilience of homeostasis, the system starts collapsing, right? Whereas, when we talk about supporting capacity, it refers to sustainable harvest. Assimilative capacity refers to stress bearing capacity of the community of ecosystem. So the capacity of a plant community with high population density, for example forest, to bear stress of drought, wind, cold or fire is higher than that of a community with low population density. Similarly, when we talk about a healthy soil, it has a higher stress bearing capacity and is more productive than a soil that is affected by salinity or alkalinity. So we must adopt lifestyle and development paths that respect and work within nature's limit. So when we talk about environmental sustainability requires conservation of the two dimensions of natural capital, resource and things. More specifically, the exploitation rates of resources should not exceed their regeneration or substitution rate, while generation or emission rates of waste or pollution should not exceed the assimilative capacity of the environment. So overshooting the limits will eventually deplete or degrade the natural capital and thus compromise the ability of future generation as well as the present ones to meet their needs. So summarizing the thing, what we have learned today is we know that technically the term resource is a naturally occurring solid, liquid or gaseous material in or on the earth occurs in such form, concentration, amount that economic extraction of useful commodity. We talk about the classification of resources in terms of availability, in terms of exploitation, right? So, and we talk about the concept of renewability. So thank you very much. Let us enjoy. Happy learning.